Hi, I'm Sonja Englert, and I want to talk about crashworthiness of airplanes. I will show what airplane designers and builders can do to improve the chances of the airplane's occupants for survival in the event of a crash. Over the years, a lot has been learned from accidents and has been documented in various studies. Some things involve the structure of the airplane, some involve separate systems. This sequence of pictures shows the interior of a Cessna 172 with dummies during a crash test. Note how much the dummies move with only a 3-point harness. There are a number of things which can cause serious injury that you normally would not think about, but which are easy to improve once identified. There is a good design guide which I can recommend. Simula's Small Airplane Crashworthiness Design Guide is available online for free. Accidents fall into one of two categories which can be distinguished by the loads. Those that are potentially survivable, where loads and impact angles are relatively low and the structures stay mostly intact, and those that are probably not survivable, with high energy impacts and steep angles. Our goal is to improve the survival rate of the accidents in the first category by appropriate design of the aircraft. In this video, I want to take you through the 5 principal areas to consider: the container, which includes the fuselage structure; the restraint, which is the seat belts, seats and attachments; energy management, which are the restraints, seat and fuselage structure and engine mount; the environment, which is the cabin layout and items within the occupant's strike zone; and post-crash factors like fuel system, fire and egress. The first principle refers to keeping the structure of the cabin from collapsing and maintaining enough space for the occupants. The main two crash directions are forward and down, so the load angles can be quite different. These two fuselage cross-sections show a vertical impact. On the left one, only the subfloor structure crashes. On the right, the fuselage structure itself collapses, which must be avoided. Composites are brittle, which means they deform some but then break suddenly. This happens with cockpits of older composite gliders, which have thin-walled fuselage shells and seat structures which collapse easily. In this test, you can see the canopy frame and fuselage side buckling out, reducing the space available for the pilot. A lot of research, analysis and crash tests have been performed to improve this for gliders. In this more recent design, which includes an energy-absorbing crash zone in the nose and reinforced cockpit structure, especially the canopy and seat frame, the cockpit space stays intact. This test was performed by the Akaflieg München, one of their designs. The sequence of pictures shows the steep angle of impact, with weight simulating the mass of the wings. The sacrificial nose structure does its job and crashes, while the dummy slides a bit forward despite the seat belts. The fuselage bounces back into the air, rotates and hits the ground with a tail boom as well. The loads on the dummy were found to be below the limits for survival. One of the production gliders where this was applied is the Antares 20E. Metal structures are ductile, which means they deform before breaking, absorbing energy. Here's another crash test sequence example that uses an aluminum Cessna 172. The soft surface decelerates the airframe rapidly, and the gear attachment fails first. This pitches the nose down and buckles the tail, but the cockpit stays largely intact. In a high-energy impact, the front cockpit structure collapses completely, leaving little chance for survival. Steel tube structures are inherently suitable for crashworthiness because the material is strong but ductile, and when the tubes deform, they dissipate energy. The best fuselage structures cannot protect the occupants if they are not attached to it with seat belts. This needs to include shoulder belts to prevent head strikes on the instrument panel. The certification requirements specify the following maximum load factors for the occupants: 9G forward, 6G downwards, 3G upwards, and 1.5G sideways. Instrumented dummies are used to measure if the loads on the occupants are within those survivable limits. It is important to place the seatbelt attach points according to this picture. The shoulder belt attachment should not be lower than this, or the shoulder belts can cause high loads on the spine during the forward crash case. The lap belts must sit across the hip bones and not any higher up, or the internal organs can be squished against the spine in the forward crash case. The attachment of the seat belts to the airplane structure has to be strong enough to withstand crash loads, not just flight loads. Wrapping a seat belt around a structural tube is a good way. With end brackets, the belts can also be bolted to primary structure of the fuselage. If the seat belts are attached to the seat, the loads will also apply to the seat structure and the fuselage structure that the seat is attached to. This is typically the case for sliding seats mounted on rails. The actual load factors during a crash are the result of how rapidly the aircraft decelerates. If an airplane hits the ground or obstacle while at a slow stall speed, there is much less energy to absorb than if an airplane hits the ground at high speed. In this chart, the airplane kinetic energy at the crash speed of 40 knots was set to 100%. For the same weight of the airplane, the impact energy increases with the square of the speed. At 100 knots, the impact energy is more than 600% of that at 40 knots. The higher the stall speed or impact speed of an airplane is, the more thought has to be put into how to make the airframe strong enough and how to slow the deceleration of the structure with shock-absorbing elements to keep the loads on the human bodies low enough for them to survive. It is easy to see that above a certain speed, a crash even in a well-designed aircraft becomes unsurvivable. The kind of surface where the crash takes place also has an influence on the loads on the airframe and occupants. If you hit your head on a brick wall, it hurts a lot. If there is a mattress between the brick wall and your head, it may hurt only a little. For the design, we have to assume the worst case and add the mattress to the airframe in the form of energy-absorbing elements. An energy-absorbing element is, for example, the landing gear if it is fixed, but it is designed for landing loads, which are mostly vertical. Crash loads come at many different angles, so the gear is usually the first thing that gets ripped off. If it is retracted, you can't count on it anyway. Any airplane structure in front of and underneath the occupants can be used as crash zone, which by failing gradually will decelerate the airplane more slowly and reduce the load factors. Here is an example of bulkheads that extend under the cabin floor that will serve that purpose. Many composite airplanes, especially experimental ones, have no elements for crashworthiness. Their fuselage is just a thin-walled shell with a few bulkheads, but rarely any longitudinal stiffers or longerons in the front fuselage area. The only front fuselage stiffeners in the pulsar fuselage are the engine mount unidirectional plies and a thin floorboard. I have added some additional structure in mine. Insufficient front fuselage structure leads to such results. When I designed Cowl 1, I included 4 longitudinal beams starting at the firewall engine mount points. The upper ones reach aft to the strong canopy frame. The lower ones end at the main gear bulkhead. This reinforces the front fuselage structure considerably. Where possible, energy-absorbing structures and materials should be included in the cabin, under the seat, and in the front fuselage. An example is this element that crashes at a constant load. Honeycomb offers similar performance. Seats can play an important role in the protection of the occupants if they are designed with the capability to stroke down and absorb energy. They must not move forward though, and move the occupants closer to the instrument panel. Good seat cushions help as well. They should not be too soft, but rather use a combination of soft foam on top and stiffer foam underneath. Use rate-sensitive foam if you can. This type of foam feels soft when deformed slowly, but stiffens under high compression rates. The designer and also the builder have a lot of influence on the cabin layout and shape and location of items inside the cabin that can cause unexpected injury. The seat belts restrain only part of the body. Arms, legs, and head are free to move and strike anything within reach. This picture shows on the left an actual aluminum instrument panel design that killed someone in a crash. The legs of the pilot were cut so deeply by the sharp edge that he bled to death. Adding a radius and flange on the bottom could have prevented that. It is best to place the instrument panel far enough forward so that the head cannot strike it. If that is not practical, use an ergonomic design. This picture shows how not to do it. Too many things stick out and can cause injuries. This picture shows a much better version that minimizes the possibility of striking anything sharp or pointy. Lately, airbags have become available for integration in airplane cockpits. If space is tight or three-point harnesses with inertia reels are used, an airbag can be useful. Heavy items in the cabin, especially those stored behind the occupants such as a battery or toolbox, could injure the occupants if they came loose. They need to be attached to the fuselage structure in a way that will keep them there even during a crash. Consider that the airplane may flip upside down, so design and test the hard points to the following load factors: upwards 3G, forwards 18G, and sideways 4.5G. If the airplane is a low wing and has a large canopy, it is necessary to add a roll bar, which can look like in these pictures. This is what is left over when a composite airplane catches on fire after a crash. Not much. Aluminum airplanes don't do much better either. A major post-crash risk is fire, unless you are out of fuel. Fortunately, a lot can be done to reduce the probability of post-crash fires. The designer should not place fuel tanks in places where they are easily damaged. If a fire starts, the average time to escape in large airplanes is 135 seconds before it gets too hot. In small airplanes, the average time to escape is 17 seconds. Here is an example on what not to do. The builder of this airplane wanted to increase the fuel capacity and installed a fuel tank under the belly. Remember that the gear flexes, probably enough to reduce the clearance between the ground and this tank to zero during a hard landing. If it is ripped off in a crash, a fire is guaranteed if there is any fuel left in the tank. Fuel tanks in wing leading edges should be avoided because they are more vulnerable than fuel tanks aft of the spar or in the rear fuselage. Fuel lines and other flammable fluid lines should not be routed directly over items that could ignite the liquid, such as the exhaust or electrical components and wires. Think about what could create sparks during a crash, for example, torn electrical wires and steel striking rocks. Route fuel lines in protected areas where possible. Rigid fuel lines fail before flexible fuel lines. Hoses can be further protected with a steel braided outer sheath. In this picture of an unfinished installation, the fuel lines are on top of the engine by design, where they are somewhat protected from impact with the ground, but if there is a leak, it can drip on the hot engine or exhaust parts. The oil hoses here are low and exposed and more at risk for damage. Oil is flammable and the hoses should be fire-sleeved like fuel hoses. Fuel shut-off valves should be within easy reach of the pilot without the need to loosen the seat belt, which in this Mooney is clearly not the case. Avoid using materials in cabin interiors that generate a lot of smoke, toxic gases or are flammable. Wool and leather are safest. Finally, the escape from the airplane after the crash should be as easy as possible. Emergency handles must be clearly marked. Painting them red is a good idea. Door or canopy handles must be within reach of all the occupants, even those in the back seat. The one in this picture looks good. The one in a Muni would be hard to reach from the back, and there's only one door for 4 people. I have also seen designs where the front sliding seat could block access to the door handle in some positions, which is not good. Consider that the airplane may be upside down. How do you get out? Can the door or canopy be opened? If it opens upwards, that would not work. If the hinge pins are easily removable, the whole door can be removed. You could also provide a large baggage door on the side that could be opened from the inside. If none of that is feasible, an axe should be on board that can be used to cut a hole in the window or canopy, which hopefully is large enough so that you fit through. If you are interested in further information, read the Simula Small Airplane Crashworthiness Design Guide. Fly safe and don't crash.